Om Tat Sat. So the title says Emergence of the Sacred Feminine in the Understanding of Consciousness via Vedānta and Yoga. But the title, I think, has it backwards because this conversation and this conference itself is what is emerging from Cit and Citi. Next, please. Next, please. Worship of the sacred feminine in Hinduism is most familiar to us in the names and forms of goddesses. Veneration of the sacred feminine, though, is not limited to names and forms. Next, please. Formless veneration, by acknowledging the cosmos itself in its fundamental constituents, like the functions of creation, sustenance, and dissolution, or the three gunas of Prakriti, is also part of Hindu thought. Next, please. This presentation is about how the sacred feminine in Hinduism is venerated beyond form and formlessness, beyond even concepts and ideas, and in the very consciousness which is the basis of them, in the light of which everything is experienced. Next, please. I have used consciousness as a shorthand for what really is Chit. Like Vayu is more than wind, Prana is more than breath, and Shakti is more than energy. Chit also is more than consciousness, though the term may be used for convenience. Being capable of sensation, perception, attention, feeling, and memory all depend indispensably on Chit. And yet, Chit is not reducible to any of them or all of them. John Woodruff's writings on Shakta doctrine and practice from the earlier 20th century offers a useful guideline for how to speak of Chit in English without doing too much violence. Chit here has been called the background of all forms of experience and the changeless principle of our changing experience. Chit is grammatically a feminine noun in Sanskrit. Words closely related to Chit in both origin and meaning, such as Chiti and Chetana, are also feminine nouns in many Indian languages too. Chiti and Chetana are synonymous with Chit in certain contexts, especially while speaking of Chit that is present as the consciousness within us living beings. Next, please. The first component in this presentation is about how the vision of Devi or Shakti as Chit and Chiti is a significant part of Shakta devotion as well as doctrine. Recitations of the Durga Saptashati and the Lalita Sahasranama, which are part of the most widespread expressions of devotion to Shakti, emphatically hail Shakti as Chit. The vast corpus of Tantra and Agama texts, which is the shared basis both of Shakta doctrine and Shaiva doctrine, is represented in this study by a compactly distilled sutra text of the Kashmira Shaiva school, Kshemaraja's Pratyabhijna Hridaya, whose principal topic is Chiti. The second component of the presentation is about how this Shakta emphasis on Chit and Chiti did not emerge in some vacuum, but from a conceptual background of the Vedānta and the Yoga Darshanas, which were influential schools during the historical period in which the Shaiva Shakta doctrine as we know it flowered. Next, please. The chant with the refrain Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu, which we have just heard, occurring in the 5th chapter of the Durga Saptashati, also called the Devi Mahatmya or the Chandi Path, is arguably the most familiar hymn to Shakti. Pandit Jasraj would render assorted verses in Rag Puriya. Of late, we even hear assorted verses in election rallies. The pattern of Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Shakti Rupena Samsthita, that is, the goddess who in all beings is present as Shakti, repeats with Shakti replaced by Buddhi, intelligence, Smriti, memory, Matra, mother, and so on. Significantly, this entire series is preceded by a verse which declares Chetana, the consciousness which renders a living being as the name of Devi. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Chetane Tyabhidiyate. And also, the The series ends with a salutation to Devi, who is in the form of an expansive consciousness called Chiti, pervading the whole cosmos. Chiti rupena ya kritsnam etad vyapya sthita jagat namastasye 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 namo nama. Devi is also called Vishnu Maya at the very start of the hymn, and the reference to Maya will be of tremendous interest when the treatment of Maya in Vedānta and Shakta Shaiva frameworks is compared. Next, please. Like the chant, Yadevi Sarva Bhuteshu is ubiquitous throughout India. A mainstay of Devi worship across southern India, particularly in the Shri Kula stream of Shakta, be it during Navaratri or on any Friday, is the Lalita Sahasranama. This chant is attached to the Brahmanda Purana and contains 1,000 sacred names of the Shri Kula system's supreme deity, Lalita Tripura Sundari. Like other chants in the Sahasranama genre, this too extensively hails the glory of the form and the action and the rituals of the deity. The Lalita Sahasranama stands out in the sheer number of names based directly on the identification of Devi with Chit. Chiti and Chiti Shakti themselves appear as names, as do names like Chinmayi, Chidekara Rupini, Pratyak Chiti Rupa, and Chetana Rupa, which reiterate how the consciousness indwelling and operative in all beings is ultimately Devi. Different manifestations of Chit Shakti like Ichha, will, Jnana, knowledge, and Kriya, action, are declared in the same name. Please note that the translations provided here from Anantakrishna Shastri are placeholders for untranslatables. Even when Chit does not literally appear in the name, it can be implied by apparent negation, like Nama Rupa Vivarjita, indicating what remains when all names and forms have ceased. Significantly, there are names showing Chit in intimate association with Sat and Ananda, pure existence and pure bliss, which along with Chit are the attributes of the Supreme Being or Brahman in Vedanta too. The ultimate nature of Chit as the changeless principle of all experience means that it's not limited to the mind and rules the world of matter too. And this is suggested in the name Jada Shakti, which appears very close to Chit Shakti in the chant. Prakriti and Maya, which in the Samkhya and Vedanta systems bring about the world of mind and matter, are also hailed as ultimately Devi herself immanent in the world. It's worth noting here that the words Chit and Chiti, besides the primary meaning associated with consciousness, have a meaning of assemblage, and they can refer to the altar of yajna, of fire sacrifice. And both these meanings of Chit can be seen gloriously combined in the name Chidagni Kunda Sambhuta, she who arose from the altar of the fire of consciousness, as depicted grandly here by Dr. Chandana Shri. The deity is also declared as Chaitanyarghya Samaradhya, one whose worship is by the oblation of consciousness itself. Next, please. The supreme deity of the Lalita Sahasranama is shown as a being who transcends all of mind and matter, while simultaneously being immanent in all of mind and matter. The chant has references to Sachidananda and Maya, which are concepts very central to Vedanta. The Shaiva Shakta view of how the Supreme Being relates to the world of mind and matter, however, has salient differences with the Vedanta school. Here, this relation is compared for the Advaita Vedanta and the Shaiva school of Shaiva Siddhanta. Other schools are similar with nuances. In Vedanta, Chit never appears distinctly from Brahman. It's always in Sachidananda. And Maya is not integral to Brahman. And it is through this Maya that the world appears to manifest. In Shaiva Siddhanta, though, Chit appears as a distinct Shakti of the Supreme Being, representing this being's will. It is this will that operates as Maya Shakti and then manifests as the world. This Maya Shakti is not only the cause of the world, but it's also the cause of liberation when we go back from the manifest world to the Supreme Being and the Supreme State. So it's not the obstacle, it's also the path. Next, please. So in the Kashmira Shaiva system, also called Pratyabhijna, the Supreme Being or the Supreme State is represented as shown. The painting by the artist Kedar is inspired by Umamaheshwara statues of the Pala dynasty, which flourished in eastern India during the flowering of Kashmira Shaivam. In this framework, the individual being's experience of the world occurs at levels of reality called tattvas, which are 36 in number, Lower tattvas represent states of bondage, and liberation is the ascent to progressively higher tattvas. The tattvas are arranged in a scheme where the 5 gross elements, earth, water, etc., are at the bottom. Maya Shakti, which we saw somewhere at an intermediate stage, and the highest tattva is constituted by Shiva and Shakti. They are fundamentally one and symbolically two. In this twinned symbology, Shiva represents Chit as pure consciousness in and of itself, and Shakti, as Chiti Shakti, represents consciousness in the form of self-awareness. This function of awareness, called Vimarsha Shakti, is represented by the mirror in the hand of Uma, which renders awareness of the highest tattva present in the form of prakasha or light. The image of awareness of the highest tattva, of the self knowing the self, is the image of liberation in Pratyabhijna, which itself means recognition. The means of liberation is indispensably via Chit Shakti, which also includes Maya Shakti. The Vimarsha Shakti also includes Vak, speech, and mantras, which are the indispensable means of attaining Artha and Tattva. Next, please. So, the Pratyabhijna Hridaya is a 10th century text from the Kashmira Shaiva luminary Kshemaraja, and it summarizes the tenets of the school in just 20 sutras, all of which are in entirety on the slide. The central theme is Chiti, which is a name by which the supreme Chit Shakti is referred to in this text. Chiti in this text occurs more extensively than even Shiva, and is a basis for explaining all that a system of philosophy should: the supreme being, the world, the individual being, bondage, and liberation. Chiti in the original state is non-different from the supreme being. Chiti is the ultimate cause of the world of mind and matter. It is a constrained form of Chiti, that is a consciousness in individual beings, and this constraining itself is bondage. Liberation is nothing but the release of this constraint and the restoration of Chiti to its original state. The text outlines disciplines and attainments for this progressive restoration of Chiti to its original state. In the Kashmira Shaiva tradition, each state of development of Chiti is dignified as a feminine deity in its own right. And these practices are forms of worship of the deity. Next, please. In the program of restoration of Chiti, it greatly overlaps with the template for liberation in the Patanjali Yoga Sutra. In the Patanjali Yoga Sutra, Chiti Shakti is literally the final word in the text. The final sutra is Purushartha Shunyanam Gunanam Pratiprasava Kaivalyam Swarupa Pratishtava Chiti Shakti Riti. So it's not just the last textual word, but also the final goal of yoga. And even if it occurs only once in the text, its significance is tremendous. Chiti Shakti here is synonymous with Swarupa Pratishtha, or the abidance of the yoga aspirant in their true nature. In this way, it is a positively articulated vision of yoga's goal, whereas Kaivalya and Chitta Vritti Nirodha are the same goal articulated in a negative or eliminative manner. Patanjali gives a program for realizing Chiti Shakti with Chitta as the initial basis. For example, the Samadhipada suggests a list of suitable objects of contemplation to stimulate the Chitta, like a steady light or the inspirational lives of the holy, so that the Chitta refines itself and the aspirant's true nature shines forth. This approach seems well illustrated by a metaphor in the Pratyabhijna Hridaya, where the Chiti Shakti in an intermediate stage of development is likened to a fire which feeds on suitable objects of experience as it evolves back into its original state and the supreme tattva. Furthermore, the practice of pranayama and the attainment of samadhi are important both in the Yoga Sutra and the Pratyabhijna Hridaya. So the occurrence of Chiti Shakti in the Yoga Sutra is not stray or coincidental. Next, please. So whether it is Chit in the Lalita Sahasranama or Chiti in the Pratyabhijna Hridayam, we have seen how veneration of Shakti is intimately associated with a vision of the universal mother as universal consciousness. The Vedānta and Yoga school systems of philosophy, where Chit is a foundational concept, and the breadth of theological imagination is sufficient to accommodate a sacred feminine, have supplied a fertile ground for the flowering of the Shaiva Shakta vision of Chit as Shakti. Om Tat Sat. And I'll be glad to take any questions.
I just wanted to ask a question actually. Just for information, you said that every stage of transformation in Kashmir Shaivism has a deity and name of its own.
Indeed, yes.
Could you tell
I'm not familiar with the entire scheme, but usual commentaries of the Pratyabhijna Hridaya, which you will find, they'll just treat Chiti in the abstract. However, when there is a codified method of Upasana, there is a Hindi commentary from Swami Lakshman Ju's disciples, and that's the text where you could refer to different manifestations of Chiti as different devis with their own associated tantras. I'll be glad to share the book as well. I do have it.
I'll get back to you.
The stotras like Kardamala Stotra, they give all the various avarnas, and every avarna like Sarvasamtrobhini. Sarvasamtrobhini is the deity of the Sarvasamtrobhini chakra in the Navavarana. And there are multiple schemes. The same process of deities, actually they are the sacred feminine forms of the levels of consciousness that you reach through the yogic meditation and travel inside. And the words like Sarvasamtrobhini, they tell you what is actually Sanchodha that is happening inside.
And I think early on in the Lalita Sahasranama, there is a glorious name, Chakraraja Ratharudha Sarvayudha Parishkrita. And the Chakraraja represents a state where all the chakras of yoga have been traversed and the supreme flowering has happened. That's one of the commentaries that Bhaskararaya gives as well.
So there are multiple schemes of the same process. And in each scheme, the names of the deities keep changing as per, and those are very clearly, very explicitly, etymologically clear names. They are describing what is happening.
I was just interested in the Kashmir Shaivism.
Intended to mention that 12 Kalis of Kashmir Shaivism when we from
I'm not sure if that scheme exactly overlaps or is exactly corresponds. I'll need to look that up. I'm not sure.
You mentioned Cit and Citi.
Yes.
Right? Do you have any difference? Do you find any difference? It's better you just clarify this difference. Whether there is because Citi is mainly used in the Pratyabhijna context.
Indeed.
That is Jaiva Siddhanta.
Yes.
Jaiva Siddhanta, they use Chaitanya. Chaitanya, Kriya, Ruma.
Yes.
Asti, Atmani, Sarvada. So Kriya is Chaitanya.
Yes.
So Shiva is always have that Shakti. He has both Chaitanya and Shakti. He has both consciousness and power. And one basic difference between all the Shaiva, especially Shiva Siddhanta and Pratyabhijna on the one hand, and Vedānta is, especially Advaita Vedānta concept, Chit, Brahma is Chit, Sat Chit.
Yes.
So there is no power that is called as a reverse Shakti.
Yes.
That he mentioned.
Power is not there. So here it is there. This Chit is there. There is a difference between this Shaiva and Vedanta. Even in Shaiva system, Chiti is a special word, special connotation
Yes.
in the Vedānta system.
Yes. Yeah, I agree that Chiti is a paribhashika pada here, and even etymologically, Chit seems a word that is more primal than all the others. So I would say that Chit represents this supreme principle. Chiti is adjacent to that, but as we see in the Pratyabhijna Hridaya itself, there are states of Chiti where it is really constrained and not very adjacent to the supreme Chit, and it finally evolves, and that program of evolution itself is shown as a program of liberation. So there is that spectrum there from in its transcendent form and its more constrained form. That's how I would link them. Indeed, indeed. Thank you so much for that comment. There's another question.
So you mentioned about Vedānta and the Sabda tradition. In Vedānta, the Maya is the apparent reality. It's Vyavahārika, it's transactional reality. So the liberation of moksha, one has to transcend that and transcend that like oil and water. And in the Sabda tradition, this Maya or the Prakriti is actually the path of the liberation. So how do you reconcile these two paths?
So the need for reconciliation would come only if we are approaching these as outsiders, and like me, we put them as two cartoons on one slide, and so a contradiction seems very evident. But for a sadhaka who has committed to a path, there is no contradiction. Sadhana assumes a certain metaphysics of the world, and somebody who has taken the Advaita path, they operate on those assumptions, and eventually the touchstone is experience, whether they achieve a state of Satchidananda by conceptualizing Maya as some veil to be lifted, or that is for their path. And here, if you're operating on the premises that Maya is not simply illusion to be done away with, but also a means, it's for a sadhaka to begin on the path and let experience be their guide is how I would respond. So please follow me.
But one has to be sure which path he
Indeed.
because ultimately the Maya is entirely different in Vedānta and the Deva system.
Indeed. That's true.
It's never a way or it's never a way. It is a particular Shakti of Shiva.
Yes, in Vedānta it's veiling, in Vedānta it's avarana, yeah.
So Maya is a different propagating in both the systems.
Indeed, indeed. Yeah. So that's the clarity is expected of a sadhaka.
So, in the book, text, Ishvara Pratyabhijna Karika, so he has the Trika concept, and in that he explains, he discusses Chit as being reminiscent or a combination of Buddhi and all the other characteristics of the individual nature of a human being. So the Shaktiya tradition, does it speak about the same level of Chit or a different kind of experience where it's specific to the worshipper of Devi, or how is it? Because this Chit and
yeah, so the thing is, I just used the Pratyabhijna Hridaya as a case study, and there, from start to finish, it is all about Chiti, and there is no explicit, say, a Lakshana Vakya given for it. It seems to either assume knowledge or seems to assume that following the program will bring clarity. So I don't know about other streams influencing Shakta. The John Woodruff paragraph, which I had put in my disclaimer slide, there he seems to have arrived at some synthesis of how Chit is conceived of in different streams of Shakta. The book from 1918, and that may be an academic resource, but then again, it's a colonial era official who became a scholar. So. Yeah, that's right. So, yeah, so I don't know if there's a consensus view of, a consensus Shakta view of Chit as such. So, thank you for the question.